ॐ भूर्भुवः स्वः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्. Namaskar, my dear friends. This is video number 6 on Vedas and Upanishads. इस वीडियो को मैं शुरू कर रहा हूँ ब्रह्मा एज चित, that is consciousness. Many philosophers in the East and the West have come to the conclusion that the soul is to be conceived of as something similar to reason, spirit, thought, or intelligence. The very conception of Atma in the Upanishads implies that the first principle of things must, above all, be sought in man's inmost self. The core of Yajnavalkya's teachings in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad is that Brahma or Atma is the knowing subject within us. In the fourth section of chapter 3 of this Upanishad, Usasta challenges Yajnavalkya to explain Brahma, that is immediate and direct, the self that is within all. Yajnavalkya replies with a reference to Atma, which animates the activities of the prana or vital breath. Pressed further by his opponent, he answers, "You cannot see that which is the seer of seeing. You cannot hear that which is the hearer of hearing. You cannot think of that which is the thinker of thought. You cannot know that which is the knower of knowledge. This is yourself that is within all everything else, but this is perishable." How is the mental form of an object illumined by the light of Atma? The image of an object is carried to the brain by a sense organ, for instance, the eye. After passing through various seeths, koshas, it reaches at last, according to Hindu psychologists, the seat of the intellect. There the light of Brahma or the self which is reflected in the intellect illumines the mental state regarding the object, and thus one becomes aware of it. The mental image of the object is transformed into knowledge of the object, but this mental state is impermanent. Therefore, the consciousness, which in reality is Brahma, associated with the mental state, appears to be impermanent. A colorless crystal, as we have said, in the proximity of flowers of different hues, appears to be blue, red, yellow, or pink. Likewise, pure consciousness, which is a man's inmost self, when associated with the upadhis of different mental states, appears in different forms. One has the knowledge of a tree, a house, a stone, or any other object, and consciousness appears in association with these objects. Or one feels happy, unhappy, greedy, lustful, or angry, and again consciousness appears only in association. One believes that the self is happy or unhappy. These emotions, however, do not pertain to the self. They belong only to the mind, and the mind is not Atma, though it is the instrument through which the consciousness of Atma manifests itself. Consciousness, which is a homogeneous entity, is in itself eternal, not discontinuous. It remains the same in past, present, and future. It does not come into existence, nor is it ever destroyed. This consciousness is Brahma. Generally, the experiences in the waking state are different from the experiences of a dream, and these again from those of deep sleep. But the consciousness that illumines all the three mental states never changes. The most graphic exposition of Atma as the knowing subject, persisting without change through the states of waking, dreaming, and deep sleep, death, rebirth, and the final liberation of soul, is given in the third section of the fourth chapter of the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Here King Janaka asks of Yajnavalkya, what serves a man for a light? The sage first gives the simple answer that the sun serves a man for light. By the light of the sun he sits, goes out, works, and returns home. When, however, the sun has set, asks the king. The moon, replies the sage, and when the moon also has set, fire, and when the fire is extinguished, the voice. But when the voice also is silenced, at last Yajnavalkya has to give the real answer. Then the self serves as his light. It is through the light of the self that he sits, goes out, works, and returns home. What is the self? It is the infinite consciousness dwelling within him in the midst of his organs and identified with his intellect. It is the light within his heart. It roams through the world of waking and dreaming, assuming the likeness of the intellect. It moves through this life and the hereafter and shares in their experiences of good and evil. It dreams, it puts aside the waking body and creates a dream body. It creates dream objects, chariots, animals and roads, pleasures, joys and delights, lakes, pools, and rivers. The self is the creator in the dream, and itself is the light to illumine the dream objects. It enjoys itself in the company of women, laughing. Sometimes it sees frightful things. Afterwards, the self moves into a state of deep sleep, and there experiences complete rest and peace owing to the absence of subject and object and of desires, like a great fish swimming alternately to both banks of a river. The infinite self moves to both these states, dreaming and waking. Then, just as a hawk or a falcon flying in the sky becomes tired and stretching its wings proceeds soaring to its nest, so does the infinite self proceed to the state of deep sleep where it feels no desires and sees no dreams. In that state, the self has no consciousness of objects and yet is not unconscious. But nevertheless, though moving as it were through the three states of waking, dreaming, and deep sleep, or through different births, the self remains in reality untouched by their experiences, for nothing cleaves to the self. It is the inner consciousness, the self, that is the real agent of perception. The senses are mere instruments. He who knows, let me smell this, he is Atma. The nose is the instrument of smelling. He who knows, let me say this, he is Atma. The tongue is the instrument of saying. He who knows, let me hear this, he is Atma. The ear is the instrument of hearing. He who knows, let me think this, he is Atma. The mind is his divine eye. Into him, as eye, all forms are gathered by the eye. He reaches all forms. Into him, As ear, all sounds are gathered by the ear, he reaches all sounds. As Brahma is the essence of being, so it is the essence of consciousness or light. Brahma needs no other light to illumine itself. It is self luminous, it is pure, it is the light of lights. It is that which they know who know the self. All material objects, such as trees, rivers, houses, forest, are illumined by the sun. But the light that illumines the sun is the light of Brahma. The sun does not shine there, nor the moon and the stars, nor these lightnings, nor to speak of this fire. When he shines, everything shines after him. By his light, everything is lighted. Brahma is Anandam, bliss. He perceived that bliss is Brahma. The Brihadaranyaka Upanishad describes Brahma as consciousness and bliss. Bliss is not an attribute of Brahma, it is Brahma itself. Brahma as bliss means that bliss is its very being, as is consciousness. Brahma is the immeasurable ocean of bliss, the bliss that knows no change. It is important to remember that no real bliss is possible without knowledge or consciousness. Na to jnanad bhinnam sukhamasti. Needless to say, the bliss that is the very substance of Brahma is not to be confused with the happiness that a man experiences when in contact with an agreeable sense object. Worldly bliss is but an infinitesimal part of the bliss of Brahma. The bliss of Brahma coming through an earthly medium. The bliss of Brahma pervades all objects. Without it, a man could not live. He who is self-created is bliss. A man experiences happiness by tasting that bliss. Who could breathe, who could live if that bliss did not exist in the heart, in his heart? For a more vivid description, it is not for the sake of the husband, my dear, that the husband is loved, but for the sake of the self, that he is loved. It is not for the sake of the wife, my dear, that the wife is loved, but for the sake of the self, that she is loved. It is not for the sake of the sons, my dear, that the sons are loved, but for the sake of the self, that they are loved. It is not for the sake of wealth, my dear, that wealth is loved, but for the sake of the self, that it is loved. The same formula is repeated in reference to the Brahmin and Kshatriya caste, the worlds, the gods, created beings, and all things. Then the magnificent passages concludes with the following exhortation. The self, my dear Maitreyi, should be realized, should be heard about, reflected on, and meditated upon by the realization of the self. My dear, through hearing, reflection, and meditation, all this world is known. Brahma is bliss because in it there is an utter absence of sorrow, and also because it is infinity. Anything that is not Brahma is full of suffering. Ato anyad artam. The self is free from sin, free from old age, from death and grief, from hunger and thirst, imagining nothing but what it ought to imagine, and desiring nothing but what it ought to desire. He is the highest Lord. He is the supreme master of all beings, the guardian of all beings, a boundary keeping all things apart and in their right places. Brahma is bliss because it is infinity. That which is infinity is bliss. There is no bliss in the finite. Out of the blissful Atma it is said, joy is his head, satisfaction is his right side, great satisfaction is his left side, bliss is his trunk, and Brahma is his spout. He who knows the bliss of Brahma, from which all speech together with the mind turns away, unable to reach it, fears nothing. An experience known to all, which gives an idea of the bliss of Brahma, is the state of deep sleep. At that time, the self remains bereft of desire, fear, and evil. It remains completely unrelated to the world. Its bliss is due to the absence of all consciousness of duality. As a man fully embraced by his loving wife does not know anything at all, either external or internal, so does this infinite being, the Self, fully embraced by the Supreme Self, not know anything at all, either external or internal. In this state, a father is no father, a mother no mother, the worlds are no worlds, the gods no gods, the Vedas no Vedas. In this state, a thief is no thief, the killer of a noble Brahmin no killer, a Chandala no Chandala, a Paulkasha no Paulkasha, a monk no monk, a hermit no hermit. When in this form he is untouched by good work and untouched by evil work, for he then overcome all the sorrows of his heart intellect. There is a difference, however, between deep sleep and the experience of Brahma. The infinite bliss of Brahma simply cannot be conceived of by the finite mind. Now, this is an examination of what is meant by bliss, Anandam. Let there be a noble young man who is well read in the Vedas, very swift, firm, and strong, and let the whole world be full of wealth for him. That is one measure of human bliss. 100 times that human bliss is one measure of the bliss of human Gandharvas, and likewise of a great sage learned in the Vedas and free from desire. 100 times that bliss of the human Gandharvas is one measure of the bliss of divine Gandharvas, and likewise of a great sage learned in the Vedas and free from desires. 100 times that bliss of the divine Gandharvas is one measure of the bliss of the fathers enjoying their celestial life, and likewise of a great sage learned in the Vedas and free from desire. 100 times that bliss of the fathers is one measure of the bliss of the Devas, who are endowed with heavenly bodies through the merit of their lawful duties, and likewise of a great sage learned in the Vedas and free from desire. 100 times that bliss of the Devas is one measure of the bliss of the Devas, who are endowed with heavenly bodies through the merit of their Vedic sacrifices, and likewise of a great sage learned in the Vedas and free from desires. 100 times that bliss of the sacrificial gods is one measure of the bliss of the 33 Devas who live on the sacrificial offerings, and likewise of a great sage learned in the Vedas and free from desires. 100 times that bliss of the 33 Devas is one measure of the bliss of Indra, and likewise of a great sage learned in the Vedas and free from desires. 100 times that bliss of Indra is one measure of the bliss of Brihaspati, and likewise of a great sage learned in the Vedas and free from desire. 100 times the bliss of Brihaspati is one measure of the bliss of Prajapati and likewise of a great sage learned in the Vedas and free from desires. 100 times that bliss of Prajapati is one measure of the bliss of Brahma and likewise of a great sage learned in the Vedas and free from desires. In other words, the bliss of Brahma cannot be measured by any relative standard, human or otherwise. Through the performance of the sacrifices prescribed in the scriptures, one may experience after heavenly worlds. After death, measures of this bliss in ascending degrees in the different heavenly worlds. But if one assimilates the teachings of the Vedas and renounces desire through the practice of spiritual discipline, one can enjoy those measures of bliss here on earth. Moreover, if a sage is completely free from desire and gains self-knowledge, he attains the full bliss of Brahma before death. His mind has transcended the horizon of the finite and become identical with the consciousness of being. The experience of deep sleep, which is free from desires, fears, and evils, is not a permanent realization. A man loses it on awakening, whereupon he returns to the world of the pairs of opposites. Through the practice of spiritual discipline, however, one can attain the knowledge of Brahma permanently and enjoy without interruption that superlative bliss. Summary of the discussion on Nirguna Brahma. We have tried above to indicate something of the nature of Nirguna Brahma, the unconditioned Brahma or pure consciousness as discussed in the Upanishads. It is a negation of all attributes and relations. It is beyond time, space, and causality. Though it is spaceless, yet without it space could not exist. Though it is timeless, yet without it time could not exist. Though it is causeless, yet without it the universe bound by the law of cause and effect could not exist. Only if one admits the existence of Nirguna Brahma as an unchanging substratum can one understand proximity in space, succession in time, and the interdependence in the chain of causality. Without the unchanging white screen, one cannot relate in time or space the disjoint pictures in a cinema film. No description of it is possible except by the denial of all empirical attributes, definitions, and relations. Neti, neti, not this, not this. Obviously, Nirguna Brahma cannot be worshipped, prayed to, or meditated upon. No relationship whatsoever can be established with it. Yet it is not altogether detached, for it is the very foundation of relative existence. It is the setu, dike, that keeps asunder these worlds to prevent their clashing together. This setu neither day nor night crosses, nor old age, nor death, nor suffering. It is the intangible unity that pervades all relative existence and gives a strong metaphysical foundation to fellowship, love, unselfishness, and other ethical disciplines. Being the immortal essence of every man, it compels us to show respect to all, in spite of their illusory masks. Though it cannot be an object of formal devotion, yet it gives reality to the gods being their inner substance and thus binds together all worshippers in the common quest of truth. Nirguna Brahma is the basis of Saguna Brahma or the personal God, who is immanent in the universe and conditioned by Maya. Without compulsion from outside, Brahma imposes upon itself as it were a limit, and this thus becomes manifest as God, soul, and world. Creation, preservation, and destruction are the activities of Saguna Brahma, mere waves on the surface of the ocean which can never touch the serene depths of the attributeless reality. It is Saguna Brahma by whom all things have been created, and by whom, after being created, they are sustained, and into whom, in the end, they are absorbed. So I end this video here. Next video number 7 will start with the topic Saguna Brahma. So thank you for watching this video. Please like, comment and share the video and subscribe the channel. Thanks a lot. Namaskar my dear friends.